You know who's funny? That guitar playing dude in NXT.
Bugenhagen.
Enjoying his mad funny.
He's pretty cool, yeah. I think he's just like genuinely.
He's just genuinely entertaining. Like. What's going on, everybody? This is Jay the Creative.
We're back. I'm Angie Wrestling.
And this is episode 108. And we are going to be talking today.
Oh, wait, I lied. I'm not Angie Wrestling. I'm sorry. I am Angelo Avenger Carter. Or Captain Carter.
And this is episode 108 of Culture 316, where we're going to be talking about women's wrestling. But Angie over here has some things to say.
I do.
Before we get this episode started, so.
All right. Number one, thank you to everyone who's been supporting us,
yes.
By the way. Even from supporting us all the way back from our first episode in April 2017.
Yep.
The show's definitely evolved a lot, and I just want to thank everybody who has watched from back then, who started watching now, who will start watching in the future, who has started watching because we met them at the
Jabba Tears podcast.
Thank them always. So yeah, just thank you everybody who has supported us, and that's number one. My second one is a PSA. This is just a PSA to wrestlers, and I want this to actually be cut as like a clip.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a PSA to all wrestlers. If you think that being a heel is let me be edgy and say something really offensive, you don't deserve to be in the wrestling business. And I'm being 100% serious. I have 4 months of wrestling training. I'm barely in the business myself, but I deserve to be there more than you do. There is no way you going out of your way to call somebody a jungle monkey or an N-word, and you're not black. You know what I'm saying? Like, no. We don't do that. So if you feel like, oh, well, I'm going to start a Twitter war with another wrestler, and I'm going to be all edgy, and I'm going to try to replicate what Ronda, Becky, and they're doing on Twitter, and we're going to have this big social media war. If you feel like you need to be offensive to be a good heel, you are not a good wrestler. I don't care how great you are. I don't care how many damn flips you can do. I don't care if you can out-wrestle I don't care if you can out-wrestle the best wrestlers in the company. I don't care if Triple H, Ric Flair, Dave Meltzer, Bryan Alvarez, everybody who is somebody in the wrestling business says that you are the greatest and you are going to be the greatest. You suck. And on a lighthearted note, y'all saw that Avengers trailer? At Marvel Studios. I just want y'all to know. On April 25th, I'm legitimately just going to take off my... I don't actually have on a wig for y'all. But, I'm going to take off my hair, and I'm just going to lay it on the floor. Like, just take it. Take it. Like, take my money, take my edges, take everything, because I don't want it. I don't need it. All right, those are my announcements.
And now I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about women's wrestling.
Clap, 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 clap.
Benny, yeah. So today we're going to be talking about women's wrestling, the women's revolution. What does it mean? What it was like before the women's revolution? What it was like transitioning into what we consider the women's revolution, and the current place and time and where we see this kind of going. But first we're going to start off Fastlane.
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty good show, pretty good pay-per-view. Out of a 10, we'll give it a 7.
Okay.
7.5. That fatal 4-way match for the U.S. title was a banger. That joint was so good. And Zelina Vega is my staticky queen.
Zelina Vega. Let me just explain something to you. She
said, I'm not jacking it.
Or she said, I'm not jacking it. She said, dead ass? I was like, okay, so let me explain something to you. Under the status, I was like, yeah, because it's just like,
how can you not?
Like,
how can you not?
And she's from Queens. But we like it's Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. Staten Island, and the Bronx. But Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, right?
Yeah.
And Carmella's from Staten Island.
Staten.
Anyway, the pay-per-view itself, I didn't watch. That was my mother's birthday, so, we were doing stuff, and I was watching Captain Marvel again, because I'm a nerd. But from what I saw, I'm just happy that for the first time since her coming up in 2015, Sasha Banks has retained a championship in her first defense.
Right.
Granted, she didn't get the pin, which, whatever.
But hey, win by association because you're the tag team
She
champions.
retained a title, and I was just happy about that.
Right.
Because WWE's the type of people that would be like, oh, let's flex it over to Nia and Tamina and play hot potato with the belt for the next, 3 years.
That's true.
I'm just very happy about that. I think this, and I'll talk about it more later, this Becky, Ronda, Charlotte story is completely convoluted. They've ruined it. It's just, I'm not half as interested as I was when the Royal Rumble was around.
There's too much going on.
There's just too much happening.
There's too much happening.
This Shield reunion, last time ever thing, I don't believe it for a second. Because, of course, it's not going to be the last time ever. Yeah, those are pretty much my notes from the pay-per-view. I don't think there's really anything else.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
1 to 10, I mean, I can't really rate it because I didn't watch it.
Right.
But from the results, from everything that's happened, and from what other people are telling me, I guess I could kind of, 7, 6, whatever. Fastlane is a not needed. Like, stop. No more Fastlane. Royal Rumble, Elimination Chamber, WrestleMania. This is a completely unnecessary pay-per-view.
I can see that for sure. I can see where you're coming from with that. But we're going to talk right now about women's wrestling. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You can start.
All right. So, when we're talking about women's wrestling, we're talking about the history of women's wrestling. It kind of goes back to the 60s and 70s. You had women like Mae Young, women like Fabulous Moolah, who was a crappy person.
Yeah.
And they were kind of like the first big women's wrestlers in the industry. There are more, but I'm just naming the ones that I know of. And then we get into the 80s and the 90s when WWE has a lot more mainstream exposure. You had women like Alundra Blaze and, also known as Medusa.
Yeah.
Who was kind of like the women's wrestler, the pioneer women's wrestler. But then you had other women like Sunny, Terry Runnels,
right.
Chyna. When we get to the 90s, and a lot of the women that I just mentioned were pretty prominent in the 90s. When we get into the 90s, we see that a lot of women in wrestling were being sexually objectified as a part of the Attitude Era. So we're talking about even early Trish Stratus.
Yeah, I know y'all remember Bark Like a Dog.
A little bit of, Lita. I don't think that Lita was as objectified as Trish, though. There were other women involved as well.
Lita wasn't tall, blonde, and didn't have boobs.
Yeah, but she was still objectified in a sense. Even Chyna, to an extent, was kind of objectified. But then we go from the 90s, right, that Attitude Era, into the 2000s. But even in the 90s, not just in WWE, but like even WCW, I don't remember WCW having a women's championship, having a women's division. I just remember there being Nitro Girls, which was kind of like taking the concept of sport cheerleaders and putting it on a wrestling show. Tori Wilson was a Nitro Girl. Charmel was a Nitro Girl. And I feel like, I can't speak for the women who were in that because a lot of them did it by choice and they wanted to do it, so all power to them. But it kind of followed the narrative of women being used in wrestling as for sex appeal, to be sexually objectified. But as we get into the 2000s, we're starting to see Trish and Lita move away from being managers of tag teams and tandems into being individual talents.
I think they're two of the biggest breakouts in the women's division of all time.
Absolutely. So we see Trish Stratus, we see Lita, but we also see Molly Holly, we see Victoria, we see Gail Kim, who doesn't really get as much respect as she deserves, because I honestly believe that she was a big figure when it comes to women's wrestling.
Yeah.
Whom else? Obviously on SmackDown you had Tori Wilson, you had Sable, you had Dawn Marie, Jacqueline was another women's wrestler who was big at the time. She was big in the 90s. She's bigger more so in the 90s than she was in the 2000s. But all these women were incredibly important to the women's division in the WWE in the early 2000s. And then we kind of go really, really divas.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Michelle McCool, Kelly, Layla, Ashley, Candice Michelle, Maria.
I started watching during the Divas era.
Yeah.
So, like, that was, like, really my first exposure to wrestling. I've always loved women's wrestling. I always, thought that the women could get more. Maurice was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I always thought Maurice was pretty good when she was, like, full-time wrestling.
Right.
I mean, you couldn't, like, at that time, I did like the Bella Twins. I still like the Bella Twins.
Same.
I loved, like, their twin magic gimmick. I thought that was really cool. But the Bellas weren't necessarily used to their full potential.
Very true.
And sorry to take over, but the Divas division, when they introduced the Divas Championship and had both the women's and Divas title, it was still kind of like, okay, like, what was that, 2008?
Yeah, 2008.
So, like, I still kind of remember how, like, it was very, it was still, like, good matches, nothing like too great, nothing like what we're getting now, but definitely nothing like it was like super in the 90s. But then when you get into like 2009 and 2010, and then you start to get the more of the pillow fights and the 6-woman tags where the girls are going out and they're like, go home. There's a thread on Twitter, which I shared. This was
a while ago.
Yeah, this was a while ago. This is back when Paige had actually made some comments that the fans were actually the ones, or did she say it was the fans?
The fans didn't want women's
wrestling, but WWE never held the women back. And there was a thread of different women, Michelle McCool, Naomi, who were saying, like, they would tell us, no, you can't, don't fight like the guys, like, fight like girls, slap, pull hair. No, you're too athletic. You can't be like them. No, you are. You can't. They who did they send out? It was Michelle McCool and somebody else who they sent back out to retape a match during SmackDown because their punches looked too good. Are you serious? A punch? Now, if I punch you in the face for real, is that gonna look too good? Hello?
But also, I forgot to mention, shout outs to Natalya and to Beth Phoenix, who are definitely ahead of their time.
Yeah, way ahead of their time.
Way ahead of their time. I also forgot to mention Melina.
Yes, way ahead of her time.
Way ahead of her time. Caitlyn, another one, way ahead of her time. Thank God.
AJ Lee.
Yeah, AJ Lee.
We're kind of getting into her.
Yeah, we're getting into that era now. Caitlyn was another one who was ahead of her time. I'm glad she was able to come back for the Mae Young Classic and do a really good job and be able to really show the world what she's capable of. So we're getting out of kind of like the 2000s to 2010 era.
Yeah.
I think the pillow fights were more so like early 2000s because it was pillow fights. It was dancing contests.
I remember a lot of that in 2009.
It was bikini contests. It was bra and panties matches. Those are kind of like the landmarks of women's wrestling when it came to the early 2000s as it pertains to WWE. Now, what I will say is, also, Awesome Kong was another one way ahead of her time.
Right.
Something that we need to mention as it pertains to women's wrestling is that TNA was a company that was ahead of their time as well because they got the ball rolling on women's wrestling about 5 to 6 years before WWE
really kind of was like, oh, well, maybe
they gave Gail Kim. They had a Knockouts championship and Knockouts tag team championships.
I think they had a first women's pay-per-view before WWE did.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think they had a women's pay-per-view.
They did.
They did?
It's you can find it.
Really? That's interesting. I didn't know that, but TNA, they had Angelina Love, Velvet Sky. They had Awesome Kong, who was known as Karma. Victoria did a stint over there. ODB. Gail Kim is kind of like their OG. Gail Kim is still in that company right now. She's kind of the head of the Knockouts.
Mickie James, even when she left WWE in
went over there.
2009, she went to TNA for a few years before coming back in 2016.
Yeah. So TNA got the ball rolling. And when we're talking about like after 2010, that's when we begin to see women like AJ Lee come into the picture and kind of really change how people saw women's wrestling. And at the same time, Triple H and NXT was having women like Paige and Emma come up, and they were putting on these great matches.
Well, let's not forget there's a specific era that I did kind of want to discuss, and that is like 2010, 2011, 2012, where the girls really didn't get WrestleMania. They didn't really get, anything for real. Again, they were getting like, go home, go out to the ring, go home, 30-second matches, 2-minute matches, battle royals, that era, I think that 2010 to like 2012, right before we got to this era, the NXT era,
right? For,
whatever. You still had Natty, you still had Beth Phoenix, you had Caitlyn and AJ Lee came up a little bit after that, maybe like 2011, 2012. But yeah, you had AJ Lee, you had Caitlyn, you had people who were now figuring out, okay, like this women's wrestling is more than just, go out there, put on a good match, or go out there, put on like a 2-second match, go out there and go home, go out there. AJ and Caitlyn, they had a match for the WWE Divas Championship, and they actually went overtime than they were supposed to. I remember I read that in AJ Lee's book. And, just a lot of things like that era to me, it was like the women were always thrown into like the special guest celebrity match, or they had a 6-woman tag match, or, an 8-woman tag match.
Right.
2009, you had the first ever WrestleMania, the real first ever Miss WrestleMania Women's Battle Royal, and you had Santino Marella winning as a comedy spot, which isn't cool,
Right.
Like that's not, a man for real, like a male in drag, like that's not funny, and if they would have ever tried that today, you saw what they did to James Ellsworth. They literally made them do that whole Money in the Bank match over again because James Ellsworth won the match for Carmella. But it's getting a little too far ahead of where I wanted to go. But and then I kind of want to take it into the NXT era. Ooh. So Triple H is, NXT, the old game show NXT. You had like a season that was all women.
Right.
It was Naomi was on that season, Caitlyn, AJ Lee. There were quite a few names that were on that season that were actually in the WWE now or did like a small stint for a few years.
Right.
But most notably is AJ Lee, Caitlyn, and Naomi.
Right.
Now, Naomi started off as a dancer for the the
Brodus Clay
Jesus and Christ. Oh my God, Lord Tensai. I forgot about Lord Tensai or A-Train or Matt Bloom or whoever you
Shout
want.
outs to Matt though.
That's a fact. And her and Cameron kind of started off doing,
yo, that trip is
honestly. And then you had AJ Lee and Caitlyn kind of do their own thing. They were a tag team for a while, and then AJ Lee kind of broke off and was with Dolph Ziggler and was with Daniel Bryan, and she actually ran Raw for quite some time.
Right.
And, it was like AJ Lee definitely took the ball and ran with it. And AJ Lee in 2014 became the second, at the time she was the longest reigning Divas champion with 296 days under her belt. And then, the NXT era, meanwhile, so, you have the girls on Raw and on SmackDown. And this is well into even the beginning of 2015, having 30-second matches, 2-minute matches, battle royals, go home.
But another thing to mention, because I think what it is important to mention is that because the NXT era kind of didn't start there. NXT era was more so the beginning of the women's revolution as far as WWE was Paige versus Emma for the WWE NXT Women's Championship. And I think it was the WWE NXT Women's Championship. And that kind of sparked a focus on women in WWE through NXT, and then that's when you begin to hear about whomever you're probably going to mention.
Yeah,
so
we all know who I'm going to mention. And then 2013 we have the 4 horsewomen who get signed to WWE. You have Sasha Banks, Bayley, Charlotte Flair, and
Sasha.
I said Becky Lynch.
Yeah.
Was the 4th one. Well, it was like between 2012 and 2013 they get signed, and man, that really did kind of change the women's division. You have Charlotte, who was a natural born athlete. She's Ric Flair's daughter, but she wasn't allowed to even like really push the fact that she was Ric Flair's daughter. Sasha Banks, who you can tell just loves this so much, was a wrestler on the indies for a few years. Bayley, who was a wrestler on the indies for a few years. Becky Lynch, who is having the run of a lifetime right now.
Absolutely.
And gave up wrestling for 7 years.
And then came back.
And came back because, of NXT, and was immediately like basically signed.
Right.
And not just to focus on the 4 horsewomen, but you also have women in the company who, like Alexa Bliss and, like Carmella and Asuka, who came later, of course, and Ember Moon, who came later. But just to focus on that 2015 era, you have the Divas Revolution, where, you have the women, they bring the women up. And then I think there's 3 matches that I think really changed the perception. Team, Natty versus Charlotte. That was a match. Charlotte had only really had 2 years of wrestling experience. And to see her like really go in and have a match like that with Natalya,
who is a veteran and a respected one at that.
And the only women, like they say, like Michael Cole says all the time, the only female to survive the Hart Family Dungeon of pro wrestling. So that was a match. 2015, you had the Fatal 4-Way for the NXT Women's Championship, where Sasha Banks won it in January. And then you have the match that everyone kind of looks at as the martyr, the sign, the stamp of, yes, women's wrestling is here and it is here to stay, and there's nothing you can do about it if you don't like it. And that is Sasha Banks versus Bayley for the NXT Women's Championship at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn, which is a match that I can watch. Like, I can turn it on and just watch it from beginning to end, start to finish, with no problems.
Right.
And then, so yeah, that's really like 2015. And then
the Nikki, well, I think still 2015 will be Charlotte versus Nikki for the Divas Championship, because that signified, Charlotte went on to become the last Divas champion, but I feel like that moment of her winning that title was kind of the beginning of the biggest shift in the women's division, because from there, that's when we see women having longer matches. That's when we see the Divas title being seen as prestigious in the WWE, which would, then kind of lead to WrestleMania 32, which is,
WrestleMania. So they led into WrestleMania Dallas, WrestleMania 32, or WrestleMania Star, whatever you want to call it. And that was the night where they reintroduced the brand new WWE Women's Championship. And I know that there were like, people even still to this day are like, oh, well, they used to have a WWE Women's Championship. Why don't they acknowledge that? Well, the Divas Championship and the Women's Championship were merged in 2010. So the old Divas Championship follows the lineage of the old WWF Women's Championship. So Charlotte technically is the last one. And then also she's the first WWE Women's Champion, which then led to like a string of just fantastic matches throughout the back half of 2016 with Sasha Banks, starting in July, where Sasha won the title, and then SummerSlam, Charlotte won it back, and then October, Sasha won it again, and then Hell in a Cell, Charlotte won it back. And then November, Sasha won it again, and I still think their best match that they've had, that fantastic Falls Count Anywhere match.
In Charlotte, right?
That match was that's another match I can just watch.
Definitely.
Still, I think it's their best match that they've had ever. The fantastic Falls Count Anywhere match, and then Roadblock into the Line, And then, from there, Charlotte kind of retained, and their rivalry kind of ended for the, well, not retained, Charlotte won it back, and their rivalry kind of ended for a minute. But, yeah, and now we're kind of in this era now where women's wrestling is, in WWE, is becoming a lot more respected.
Right.
And you have guys who aren't like, oh, well, they're just a bathroom break match. Remember, the Divas used to be the come down match between the two big main event matches at the, they would be right before the main event. Everybody's like, oh, okay, I'm tired, dang.
Now, anytime you think about a women's match, like if I'm thinking about the last women's title matches and pay-per-views, and all of them have been main event material, whether we're talking about Ronda and Sasha, whether we're talking about the tag team titles in the Elimination Chamber, or we're talking about Ronda, Charlotte, Becky at Mania. Everything has been main event material and main event content.
Right.
And so I think that kind of shows you kind of how far WWE has come as far as their women's division and this women's revolution.
Right. And then they had, last year they had the biggest, the biggest signee ever that they've had in Ronda Rousey, who did change the perception of women in combat sports. Dana White used to always say, oh, no women in the UFC. And then Ronda Rousey came around and dominated for like 3 or 4 years.
And she only has 2 losses.
She only has 2 losses. And regardless of how you feel, about Ronda Rousey, because I know there are quite a few people who don't like Ronda Rousey. There are quite a few people who don't, necessarily like her being in the business. I don't like have an issue with it. I think Ronda's kind of cool. As far as her wrestling and as far as her being kind of embracing the pro wrestling business, and kind of how they embraced her very early, especially at that WrestleMania match last year. Ronda really did kind of change their view.
Changed the view and kind of changed the mainstream perception around WWE and their women's division. It's kind of insane when you think about it, because like Ronda came in, won the title. She won the title in her third match, but I was at Mania last year. We were at Mania last year, and her debut match was the match of the night.
Legitimately.
And that's not an exaggeration.
No.
And for you to be the match of the night at WrestleMania, the performance of the night at WrestleMania, when there was when you had Roman and Brock, and you had AJ and Shinsuke, and you had
when you are on the same card as AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura,
and you have
the best match on the card.
That's something.
Yeah,
that's
and then to get to this year, and the women are, I think we're pretty 95% sure that the women are going to close WrestleMania this year.
As they should.
The big triple threat between Ronda Rousey defending against Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch. Wow. My thing is, like I said before, the women would really get on very scarcely on the WrestleMania card. And
I put this in perspective for you. 6 years ago at this event, at this venue,
MetLife. Yes.
The women's match,
girls got cut.
The girls got cut, and now they're main eventing.
Exactly. And it was so crazy because that was the first episode of Total Divas. It was Naomi and Cameron and just the Tons of Funk. That's what they were called. The whole faction versus Cody Rhodes. The Rhodes Scholars. Oh yeah, what's his name? Damian Sandow. Versus and the Bella Twins, and their match got cut because I think Punk and Taker went too long.
Right.
So to think that in the same exact venue, and I know they have to be pushing this. They have to do this in some kind of
or in something.
In their WWE 24. That I just love the 24s. They're gonna mention the last time we were at MetLife, there wasn't a women's match. There was no not a single woman was on that card.
Absolutely.
And to think that this year there's a possibility that we can have 4 women's matches on the card,
and one of them being a main event.
One of them being the main event, you have the Women's Tag Team Championships. Sasha Banks and Bayley are, hopefully retain them or whatever. But you have them going in and defending those titles. You have the SmackDown Women's Championship. You have the Raw Women's Championship, as we've mentioned, and the WrestleMania Women's Battle Royal. And let's say they do another mixed tag this year.
Another mixed tag, or we could see Zelina and Carmella.
Let's say that they do that.
I would love to see that.
You have five women's matches, and that's obviously not confirmed, but as of right now, there's a possibility of us having 4 women's matches on the WrestleMania card. 4.
That's a huge accomplishment.
That's been unheard of.
Yeah.
Just 2 years ago, we only had 2 women's matches: the Raw Women's Championship, SmackDown Women's Championship.
Right.
And for the fact that the women are taking up more space on these big WrestleMania, SummerSlam, big shows.
Than the men sometimes.
More space than the guys, yeah. The women are main eventing, and Sasha Banks, and I forgot to mention Sasha Banks and Charlotte in Raw October 3rd were the first 2 women to main event Monday Night Raw since Trish Stratus and Lita did in 2004. And another fun fact, Charlotte was actually in the crowd at that match.
Trish and Lita, right?
Trish and Lita at Charlotte for 12 years later, Sasha Banks and Charlotte to main event at that same arena at the Falls Count Anywhere match. That's just insane.
It is. And to be honest, WWE has done an amazing job as far as progress amongst the women. Now, I think the next question, because we're going to close this out because this is time.
Mm-hmm.
The future of women's wrestling, where do you see it going from here? Who do you think is the next big star? We'll start with that. We'll end on that, I should say.
Well, before the next big star, I really do think that they need to do an Evolution 2 this year.
Yep.
We forgot to talk about Evolution. How can we freaking do that?
Evolution was the first WWE women's pay-per-view held in Long Island last year. Finals of the Mae Young Classic. Raw Women's title. SmackDown Women's title.
They absolutely did.
And they killed it. And they didn't really have a lot of investment in it.
They did not put any investment into this. They really didn't. This was such a, oh yeah, Evolution. But it was...
The women made it work.
The women...
made it work.
Freaking killed it. Sasha Banks, Bayley, Natty, the Riot Squad, great match. But Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair in that Falls Count Anywhere match was...
incredible.
Insane.
And I think that was the deal breaker for Becky main eventing this year.
Insane. And the thing is, Becky stopped wrestling for 7 years. So everything that Becky does, is super doesn't look great, super athletic, whatever. But Becky is heart. And that's what I love about Becky Lynch. Anyway, back to your question. So Evolution 2, we need an Evolution 2. WWE. Don't at me. Bianca Belair.
I think I can concur. I see. Number one, I think we do need an Evolution 2. I think we need it in 2019. Also believe that intergender wrestling is going to be a thing, but we're going to see women and guys competing.
Right. Nia Jax when her spot's in the Royal Rumble.
Yeah, I think that was foreshadowing. Also do believe that Bianca Belair is the next big thing.
I do too.
As it pertains to, obviously she's amazing on NXT as is. However, I do believe
It's a mindset.
It's a mindset. And I feel like she's the next, when we're talking about athleticism, when we're talking about in-ring performance, when we're talking about mic skills, when we're talking about the whole package, we're talking about Bianca Belair.
The entire package.
The entire package.
Superstar.
She is a super duper star. And I don't
just love her.
Yeah, she's amazing. And I think she's gonna be. Yeah, I got mine. But yeah, I think she's gonna be the next big thing. And as it pertains to women's wrestling, it's gonna be going upward and onward from here.
Yeah, there's no
limits now.
If they were to ever regress, I think that this company would get so much flack for that.
Absolutely.
It is only going to go up for the women here,
There's no turning back.
There really is no turning back at this point. I'm excited for, the next big women's show. I'm excited for whatever they have in store for the women. I'm excited for the women to main event this year. So, yeah, I mean, women's wrestling is on the up and up in WWE. Now, of course, we couldn't cover everybody.
Yeah.
But also,
want to give a shout out to Impact Wrestling.
right? Impact, Shimmer. What are some of the other
Women of Honor?
Women of Honor. Just if you know some other women's wrestling.
Yeah, tag them in here. We're talking about Jordan Grace. We're talking about Tessa Blanchard, Taya Valkyrie, Allie, Rosemary.
One of my favorite women's wrestlers actually is an indie wrestler. She wrestles for a House of Glory, Sonya Strong. Absolutely love her. Just like, hello.
Yeah, so if you know a women's wrestler, tag a women's wrestler. Or any company.
Promotions, like, let us know. Like, there's more. I want to watch.
Yeah, I want to watch all the women's wrestling that I can watch. But Tessa is like doing this. Yo, Tessa.
I love her.
Oh, God. She's amazing. But anyway, that's going to be it for our show today.
Sure is.
But we're going to be back next week, and we're going to be talking about more wrestling stuff. So be sure to like, tag, comment, and subscribe.
We're on the road to WrestleMania,
We're on the road to
baby.
WrestleMania, y'all, and it's an exciting time. So we will see you guys next week.